Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Mercer penthouse like 1,000 fists demanding entry. Lightning cracked across Boston's skyline, illuminating the marble foyer in violent white bursts. The clock on the wall read 11:44 p.m. on a July night so humid the air felt like drowning. Elena Cole stood frozen in the doorway, barefoot, her grey work dress soaked through. Her left eye was swollen completely shut, the skin around it a landscape of purple and black. Handprints bloomed across her throat like a disease, dark and unmistakable. In her arms, 6-year-old Noah clung to her neck, his small body shaking, tears streaming down his round face. "Mama, Mama, don't let her take me," Noah whispered into Elena's collar. Catherine Mercer emerged from the shadows of her penthouse like a predator who had finally cornered its prey. Blonde hair swept back in perfect waves despite the late hour. Silk robe in cream, tied at the waist with a sash that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent. Her eyes were the color of winter ice, and they fixed on Elena with the kind of contempt reserved for things that had already been decided to disappear. "He's not your son anymore," Catherine said, her voice cutting like a blade wrapped in ice. "You're the nanny. A servant. A girl who sleeps in a converted closet because that's all someone like you deserves." Elena's lips moved but no sound came out. Her hands trembled. She could feel Noah's heart hammering against her collarbone, matching the rhythm of her own terror. Catherine stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the marble. "You have 30 seconds to put my child down and leave this building. If you don't, I will call the police and tell them you tried to kidnap him. Do you understand what happens to girls like you in federal prison, Elena?" The name struck like a slap. Catherine had never used her name before. Not once in 3 years. She had called her you, the nanny, sometimes just snapped her fingers as if Elena were a dog that had not learned its commands. Elena's other hand trembled as she reached into the pocket of her dress. The bills were crumpled, worn soft from being counted and recounted 1,000 times. $34. That was all. That was everything. She pulled them out and held them toward Catherine like an offering to a god who would never be satisfied. Catherine's laugh was the worst sound Elena had ever heard. Sharp and cold and absolutely certain of her own victory. $34? You can't even afford a hotel room. You can't afford anything. Where exactly do you think you're going with my child? Behind Catherine, the marble foyer seemed to close in. The ceiling soared 40 feet above them, all that space and money and distance between Elena's world and this one. A Monet hung on one wall, probably worth more than she would earn in her entire life. The chandelier above cast shadows that made Catherine's face look skeletal, cruel, victorious. Noah began to cry harder. Not the loud crying of a child. The quiet, broken crying of someone who understood that the people supposed to protect him were about to tear him away. Elena pulled him tighter against her chest, his legs wrapping around her waist. He was so small. Still so small. She had changed his diapers, taught him to read his first words, held him when he woke screaming from nightmares. For 3 years, she had been the one who braided his hair, packed his lunchbox, read him stories at night in the small converted closet they had shared on the 3rd floor of this penthouse. "Please," Elena whispered. Her voice sounded shattered, like something that had been stepped on and would never quite hold sound the same way again. "Please, I'm not trying to take him. I'm trying to save him." Catherine's expression did not change. From what? His own mother. The door behind them stood open. Beyond it, the hallway stretched dark and empty. Somewhere down there, in the servants' stairwell, was the way out. The way down. The way into the rainy Boston night with nothing but a child and $34 and the prints of hands still burning on her throat. The sound of footsteps echoed up from the stairwell. Heavy. Male. Deliberate. Harold Brennan's footsteps. Elena knew them the way a rabbit knows the sound of the wolf returning to its den. Elena did not wait for him to reach the top. She turned and ran. The servants' stairwell was narrow and dark, lit only by the pale glow of emergency exit signs. She took the steps 2 at a time, her bare feet slapping against cold concrete. Noah clung to her neck, not crying anymore, just holding on like she was the only solid thing left in a world that was dissolving. Behind her, Harold's voice bellowed through the penthouse. "Get her! She's taking the boy!" The ground floor was chaos. The kitchen staff stared at her as she rushed past, water streaming from her dress, one eye nearly swollen shut, a child in her arms. No one moved to help. No one could. Harold Brennan employed these people. Fed them. Owned them in the way that money owns people who had nothing else. Elena burst through the service exit into the July night. Rain immediately drenched what was left of her. The street was empty, stretching in both directions, lined with the kinds of cars that belonged to people like the Mercers. Luxury sedans. Black SUVs. Things that cost more than her entire life was worth. She ran. That was all there was to do. Run into the night with a child and $34 and the desperate prayer that somewhere in Boston there was a place where a girl could disappear and a child could be safe. The sound of the penthouse door slamming open echoed behind her, mixing with the crash of thunder and the endless, endless rain. 3 hours later, Elena had walked 12 miles through the July storm. Her feet were bleeding. Her dress clung to her like a second skin made of ice water. Noah had fallen asleep against her shoulder, his small body shaking with cold even though the night was humid and warm. She had $34 and nowhere to go. The highway stretched ahead of her, dark and empty except for the occasional truck passing in a spray of water. She had thought about the highway for months. During her lunch breaks, when she sat alone in the mansion's kitchen eating the leftover scraps no one wanted, she had imagined this exact moment. Getting on the highway. Getting out. Getting somewhere that was not here. But she had not imagined she would be doing it broken. She had not imagined that every cell in her body would be screaming. She had not imagined that she would feel this close to simply lying down in the rain and letting it all stop. A car approached from behind. Its headlights swept across her like searchlights. She pressed herself against the guardrail, trying to make herself smaller, invisible, the way she had learned to be invisible in the Mercer household. The way that had become her only skill. The car slowed. Her heart lurched. She thought of Harold's face, the shape of his hand around her throat, the word that came out of his mouth every time he cornered her in the hallway, slut. But the car that pulled up beside her was not Harold Brennan's car. It was a black SUV, massive and gleaming even in the rain. The window rolled down smoothly, electric and expensive. A man looked out at her. Even in the darkness, she could see the shape of him, the width of his shoulders, the intelligence in his eyes. He was not old but his hair was shot through with silver. A scar ran from his left eye down to his cheekbone, a white line that told the story of surviving something terrible. "You are going to die out here," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, like something that once spoken could not be taken back. The rain is getting worse. The temperature is dropping. The child is already showing signs of hypothermia. Elena did not move. Every instinct told her to run. To keep running. That men in black SUVs did not stop to help girls like her on deserted highways. "My name is Alessandro Calabrese," he said, as if that should mean something to her. As if saying his name should make her trust him. "I own this city. I own most of the highways leading out of it. What I do not own is enough information to understand why you are walking barefoot in a thunderstorm with a child." Elena's lips moved but no sound came out. She was too cold. Too tired. Too broken. "Get in a car," Alessandro said. It was not a request. "We can discuss what comes next once you are not actively dying." Elena looked down at Noah, sleeping against her shoulder. She looked back at the highway stretching behind her, disappearing into rain and darkness. She looked at the man in the black SUV, this man whose name apparently meant something in Boston, and she made the only choice she had left. She opened the car door and climbed in. The interior was warm and smelled like leather and expensive cologne. The seats were soft in a way nothing had been soft since before her mother died. Noah immediately stopped shaking, his small body responding to the warmth even in sleep. The driver said nothing. He simply turned the SUV around and headed back toward Boston, toward the lights of the city, toward something that Elena could not yet see or understand, but that was already beginning to reshape the entire architecture of her life. 3 years earlier, the penthouse on Beacon Hill gleamed in the afternoon light. 23 rooms of marble and crystal, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor, a view worth almost as much as the $8.7 million price tag on the deed. Elena Cole had never been invited to appreciate that view. She had never sat on the Italian leather sofas or walked the Persian rugs barefoot or poured herself a drink at the mahogany bar that dominated the living room. Instead, Elena lived in a converted storage closet next to the laundry room on the 3rd floor, 6 feet by 8 feet, no window, a twin mattress on the floor, 3 dresses hanging from a wire rack, her entire life compressed into a space smaller than most people's bathrooms. Her alarm went off at 5:30 in the morning, as it did every morning, as it had for the past 3 years. Elena's eyes opened in the darkness. For 3 seconds, she did not move. She simply lay there, listening to the building settle around her, listening to the rain that had started sometime during the night and showed no signs of stopping. Then her mind shifted into the pattern it had learned so well, the list that never changed, the schedule that was more rigid than prison. 5:30. Wake. 5:45. Shower in the staff bathroom, 2 minutes of hot water before the timer ran out. 6 o'clock. Dress in the black uniform Catherine Mercer required, the one that made Elena look like furniture, functional and invisible. 6:15. Down to the kitchen. Prepare breakfast. The kitchen was smaller than the penthouse living room but larger than Elena's entire room. Granite countertops, a refrigerator that cost more than she earned in 6 months, a gas range with 6 burners. Elena moved through this space like she had moved through it 10,000 times before. She had. The coffee maker gurgled. The orange juice sat in a cut crystal pitcher. The pastries, imported from a bakery in the North End, were arranged on fine china. None of this was for her. This was for the Mercers. This was for Noah. At 6:45, small feet padded down the marble stairs. Noah appeared in the kitchen doorway, still half asleep, his uniform already pressed and waiting, his backpack positioned by the door. He was 6 years old and he moved through the world like he knew he did not belong in it, like he was apologizing for taking up space. Elena's entire heart reorganized itself at the sight of him. "Good morning, sweet boy," she said, and she knelt down to his level, brushing his dark hair back from his forehead. "Did you sleep well?" Noah nodded. He was small for 6, delicate-boned, with serious eyes that had learned too early to watch the adults around him for signs of what he should feel. "I had a dream about you," he said. "You and me were on a boat. The boat had colors. Lots of colors." Elena felt her throat tighten. She pulled him against her chest and held him for longer than she should have allowed herself. "That sounds beautiful," she whispered. "That sounds like the perfect dream." By 7:30, they were in the car, a black town car driven by Michael, the family driver, a man Elena had learned not to make eye contact with after he made it clear that he was reporting everything back to Harold Brennan, the man Elena's boss rented her apartment from, the man Elena's wages went to every single month, the man who believed this arrangement gave him rights he did not have. The private school was on the other side of Beacon Hill. Noah climbed out of the car with his backpack and his lunchbox that Elena had packed at 5 in the morning, turkey sandwich, apple slices, water, the same lunch every day because variation cost money Elena did not have. He turned back to wave at her through the window. This was the rule. No hugging, no contact, nothing that Catherine Mercer might interpret as excessive attachment or emotional display. Elena waved back. She did not let him see her smile fade. The day stretched from there into its familiar shape. Back to the penthouse to begin the cleaning. The library on the 2nd floor where Catherine kept books she never read, their spines uncracked, organized by color rather than title. Elena dusted each shelf methodically, her rag moving in small circles, not allowing her mind to wander to the fact that the cost of these unread books could have paid her rent for 4 months. The sitting room with its view of the harbor that was denied to her. The master bedroom where Catherine slept until 10, emerging eventually in silk robes that cost more than Elena's annual salary. By noon, Elena had cleaned 8 rooms. Her back ached. Her hands were raw from the cleaning solution that made her skin crack and bleed during winter. She had not eaten. She never ate during the work day because the food in the Mercer kitchen was not meant for her consumption, and the price of even a single apple might be noticed and deducted from her pay. Instead, she drank water and tried not to think about the leftover food from Noah's lunch that she might be able to salvage later. At 2 o'clock, Harold Brennan arrived. He came through the service entrance, the one that Elena used, the one that meant he did not have to acknowledge the grand front door or the marble foyer. He was 53 years old, though his face had collapsed in on itself the way faces do when alcohol has been doing the real work for decades. His suit was expensive and poorly fitted, straining across a belly that spoke of long lunches and longer evenings at bars where men like him went to talk about women like Elena. "There you are," he said. He was in the hallway outside the linen closet where Elena was restocking towels, and there was something in his voice that made the small hairs on her neck stand up. "Catherine mentioned the lock on the apartment door is sticking. I thought I would come by and take a look." Elena knew what was happening. She had learned to recognize the rhythm of these moments the way a rabbit learns to recognize the shadow of a hawk. Harold set the toolbox down. He did not actually open it. He simply stood in the hallway, blocking the path back to the main house, and he smiled. "It's an easy fix," he said. "But maybe while I'm here, we could discuss the rent increase I have been considering." Elena's voice came out small and careful, the voice she had learned to use. "The rent was raised last month, Harold. It's already at $1,900. And it will be $1,950 next month," he said. His breath smelled like whiskey and old meat. "Unless you want to make a different arrangement with me. Something more personal. Something that might make me more willing to work with you on the financial side of things." He reached for her. His hand found her waist. Elena stepped backward, bumping into the wall, and his other hand came up to her throat, not squeezing, just resting there, just showing her that he could. His fingers were cold. "Don't be difficult, Elena," he said. "We both know you don't have any other options. You're living in my building. You're working for people who barely know you exist. When you leave here, you have nothing. You are nothing. What I'm offering is stability. Protection. All you have to do is stop being so dramatic about it." Elena's hand came up instinctively, pushing at his chest. He was surprised enough to step back, surprised enough that his hand fell away from her throat. But he was smiling as he picked up his toolbox. "Think about it," he said. "The rent increase takes effect on the 1st. If you want the previous rate, you know where to find me." He left through the same service entrance he had arrived through, and Elena stood in the hallway breathing so hard she thought she might be sick. She raised her hand to her throat and felt the marks already forming, small bruises in the shape of fingers, the shape of ownership, the shape of a man's absolute certainty that he could take what he wanted. She did not cry. Crying was a luxury. Crying required emotional energy that she needed to survive the rest of the day. Instead, Elena finished restocking the towels. She went back downstairs. She prepared dinner. At 3 o'clock, she picked Noah up from school. That evening, after Noah was bathed and in his pajamas, they sat together on the small bed in Elena's closet room. The space was barely large enough for the two of them, but Noah pressed against her side like he was trying to fit inside her ribcage, like he was trying to go back to a time before he was born, before the world taught him to be afraid. Elena opened the book, Where the Wild Things Are, the same book they read every night. She had saved for 6 months to buy it from a used bookstore, 6 months of eating less, 6 months of refusing small things, 6 months of hoarding money like it was a secret language only she understood. Where the Wild Things Are, she read aloud. Max wore his wolf suit and made mischief of one kind and another. Noah's hand found her face. His small fingers traced the edge of her cheekbone, the line of her jaw, coming to rest on her throat where the bruises were forming darker with every passing hour. "Does it hurt?" he asked. Elena's entire body went still. She had been so careful. She had worn high necklines and long sleeves and arranged her collar to cover what could not be covered. "No, sweet boy," she lied. "It doesn't hurt." "I love you more than Mama Catherine," Noah said. His voice was clear and certain and devastating. "You're my real mama. You're the only real mama I have." Elena set the book aside. She pulled Noah close and allowed herself to cry then, silent tears that ran down her face while she held the only person in the world who saw her, the only person who had ever truly claimed her as his own. Outside, the rain continued to fall. The city stretched beyond the walls of the closet, indifferent and enormous. Elena held her small boy and tried to imagine how much longer she could survive like this. But somewhere across Boston, in an office on the 42nd floor of a building that bore his family name, Alessandro Calabrese was beginning his evening. He was reviewing reports about shipments and investments, about territories and arrangements. He did not know yet that his entire life was about to change. He did not know that a woman with bruises on her neck and a child who called her mama were about to become the reason he finally understood what it meant to be human again. What changed everything was the silence before the storm. The rain hit Elena Cole like a blade wrapped in ice. July 17th, 1:47 in the morning. Route 93 south, the breakdown lane, the sky cracking open with lightning every 30 seconds. She stood in the downpour with a 6-year-old boy wrapped in her wet cardigan, his small body shaking against her ribs, and in her pocket, $34. That was everything. That was all of it. Her left eye was swollen shut. The right eye could see just enough, the dark highway stretching away into nothing, the occasional headlight passing without slowing, the way Noah's lips were turning blue from cold. She had run from the Mercer penthouse at 11:47 with only the clothes on her back and the child who called her mama. Catherine had discovered them in the foyer, had smiled that terrible smile, had said the words Elena would never forget, "Take him and you'll go to prison for kidnapping. Leave him and I'll make sure you never work again. Choose, Elena. Choose right now." Elena had chosen. She had walked out into the storm. Now her vision blurred. Her ribs screamed with every breath. She shifted Noah to her other hip and stuck her thumb out toward the empty highway, toward the rain and the dark and the direction of Providence, where her cousin lived 3 hours south. A shelter had put her on hold for 2 hours. The hospital had said $47,000. The math did not work. Nothing worked anymore. "Mama, I'm cold," Noah whispered. "I know, sweet boy. I know. A car will come. Someone will help us." She did not believe it. She had worked in the Mercer penthouse for 3 years and learned that help was a luxury item, priced beyond her reach, available only to people who had something to trade. She had $34 and a child and 2 cracked ribs and a broken eye socket, and she had absolutely nothing anyone wanted. The headlights appeared through the rain like the eyes of some enormous animal. Not one car. 6 black SUVs in perfect formation, moving down Route 93 south like sharks cruising through blood-dark water. Elena's body went rigid. She knew what black SUVs meant. She had seen them before, parked in the underground garage of the Mercer building at 3 in the morning. She had heard Catherine whisper the name on the phone, Calabrese. The convoy slowed. The lead vehicle pulled onto the breakdown lane and stopped 20 feet from where Elena stood. The back door opened. The man who stepped out into the July rain was 6'3". He wore a black suit that probably cost more than everything Elena had owned in her entire life, now soaked against his muscular frame. His dark hair plastered to his forehead. A scar cut through his left eyebrow like a blade frozen in his skin. And when his eyes found her, really found her, not just looked but saw, something in Elena's chest twisted violently. She knew who he was. Not from the penthouse. From something deeper, something Noah had said once, a name whispered by Catherine late at night on a phone call, Alessandro. 2 men emerged from the vehicle behind him. The first was broad-shouldered, bald, and resting on something at his waist. The second was lean and watchful, his eyes moving across the highway in constant scan, calculating threats. Alessandro walked toward her. The rain streamed down his face, and his voice when he spoke was deep and solid like an oath. "You're bleeding." Elena could barely form words through her swollen jaw. "Please." "Not me. Just him. Take him somewhere warm. I'll pay you back. I have $34 right now, but I can." "Mama." Noah's small hand found her face. He was looking at Alessandro with an expression of perfect, impossible certainty. "Mama, is this man going to help us?" Alessandro's entire body went still. Elena felt the shift in the air like a change in pressure before a storm. The two men behind him exchanged a glance, the kind of look that said they had just witnessed something unprecedented. Alessandro knelt down in the mud, water streaming off his suit jacket, and looked Noah directly in the eye. "What's your name, son?" Noah, shivering, his small voice wavering. "Noah. Noah Calabrese." The rain seemed to pause. The world seemed to pause. Elena gasped. She had worked in that penthouse for 3 years and Catherine had never once mentioned the boy's father's name. That information had been kept from her the way you keep sharp objects from children, kept locked away, dangerous, secret. Alessandro rose slowly to his full height. When he looked at Elena, something dangerous and cold had crystallized behind his eyes. "Get in the car. Both of you. Now." I can't. That's my son you're holding. Get in the car or I will put you in it." The drive to Brookline took 23 minutes. The estate was wrapped in wrought iron fencing and guarded gates, 15 acres of manicured grounds that disappeared into darkness. Alessandro carried Noah inside while Elena stumbled behind, soaked and shaking, into a foyer with marble floors warmed from underneath and cathedral ceilings that swallowed sound. A woman was already waiting, a doctor. Alessandro had called ahead. She examined Elena's injuries in a room that smelled like expensive leather and old wood. Orbital bone fracture. 3 cracked ribs. Severe trauma. Surgery needed. Recovery would take weeks. The cost, the doctor began carefully, is approximately $47,000 for the initial surgery and follow-up care. Elena made a sound like something breaking inside her chest. $47,000. She had 34. The gap between those numbers was a chasm she could fall into forever. Alessandro stood in the doorway, watching. His lieutenants, she had learned their names, Tony and Enzo, stood flanking him like shadows. When Elena began to cry, silent tears running down her bruised face, Alessandro crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair. "Who did this to you?" His voice was different now. Gentler. The gentleness made it worse somehow, because Elena had almost forgotten what kindness sounded like. "It doesn't matter. I just need to know Noah is safe. Catherine will say I kidnapped him. She'll call the police. I'm nobody. I'm just the nanny. I sleep in a closet and I have $34. You're not nobody." The words landed like stones into still water. "You're the woman who raised my son for 3 years. You're the one he calls Mama. That makes you family. And I protect my family." Behind him, Tony and Enzo exchanged glances. In 15 years of working for Alessandro Calabrese, neither had ever heard him say those words. Neither had ever seen him kneel in front of anyone. But Elena still could not accept it. She pulled her hands away. "Why would you help me? You don't know me. I worked for Catherine. I don't even understand how Noah is your son." She never said. Alessandro's face hardened into something carved from stone. "Catherine and I made an arrangement 3 years ago. I gave her $50,000 a year to keep my son safe while I handled the men who murdered my father. She was supposed to love him. Instead she buried him in a closet and hired someone to do her job." He stood, pacing. "You did what she was paid to do. You loved him. You protected him. Tonight you ran into a thunderstorm with $34 because you would not leave him behind. That tells me everything. He stepped into the hallway and made a phone call to his lawyer. File emergency custody paperwork. Freeze Catherine Mercer's assets. Prepare for war. At that same hour, across the city, Catherine Mercer sat in her penthouse apartment with her lawyer on speakerphone. She had not slept. She had been pacing since midnight, her silk robe wrapped tight around her, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the glass of expensive vodka. The nanny took him, Catherine said, her voice sharp as broken glass. I want her arrested for kidnapping. I want my son back. I don't care what it costs. Catherine, if Alessandro Calabrese is involved. He gave up his rights. Noah is mine. That child is my leverage, my insurance policy. That man owes me $300,000, and I'm going to collect it. 20 miles away, in a coffee shop in downtown Crossing, Harold Brennan was having his own conversation with Catherine. He was sweating through his shirt, nervous energy making him jitter. His knuckles were still bruised from where he had struck Elena's face. The nanny ran, he said. She took the boy. I don't know where. Catherine's smile was the smile of someone who had just solved a very difficult equation. I know exactly where she went. Alessandro Calabrese picked them up on Route 93. Which means we have a problem and an opportunity. Catherine, that man is irrelevant. He signed custody papers. I have lawyers. We're going to get Noah back, eliminate the nanny, and collect what we're owed. All we need is leverage. She pulled out her phone and made a call. Her voice was calm, professional, the voice of someone reporting a genuine crime. Yes, hello, I need to report a kidnapping. The suspect's name is Elena Cole. She's a known drug addict, unstable, dangerous. She has my 6-year-old son. She's currently with Alessandro Calabrese, who is harboring a fugitive. Yes, I understand how serious this is. Yes, I'll hold for an officer. In the Brookline estate, Elena sat in a guest room larger than the apartment she had lived in for the past 3 years. Clean clothes had been provided. Her eye had been bandaged. She could hear Noah sleeping in the adjoining room, his breathing finally even, finally calm. Through the window, she could see the Boston skyline hazy with the last of the summer heat, the city that had never wanted her, that had watched her work double shifts and count pennies and pray in empty rooms. She did not know that in 14 hours, police would arrive at the gate. She did not know that Catherine had already begun making phone calls, pulling strings, preparing the machinery of false accusations that would transform Elena into a criminal in the eyes of everyone except the one man who mattered. She did not know that Alessandro was about to learn exactly what it meant to fight for someone who had already learned to expect nothing but loss. She only knew that for the first time in 3 years, she was warm. For the first time, someone had seen her and called her family. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine that this moment, this impossible, fragile moment, might actually be real. Outside, the rain had stopped. The storm was moving east, toward the ocean, leaving behind a temporary silence. But in that silence, everything was already changing. The rain came softer now, almost apologetic, as if the storm itself understood that it had already taken enough. Elena stood on the balcony of the guest room Alessandro had given her, her fingers wrapped around the wet iron railing, her breath forming small clouds in the autumn air. 3 stories below, the garden lay soaked and gleaming, stone paths catching what little light the city offered at 2 in the morning. Her ribs were wrapped tight beneath the borrowed nightgown, her left eye still swollen purple and yellow, a constellation of pain mapped across her body. But none of that compared to the weight pressing down on her chest, the thing that made breathing feel like drowning. She thought about what Catherine had said during the custody hearing that afternoon. Not the words themselves, those had blurred together into a symphony of accusations, but the way Catherine had smiled while saying them. That perfect, practiced smile of a woman who had already won before the judge even raised his gavel. 48 hours. That was all she had left. A court order, signed and sealed, that said Noah had to be returned to his biological mother within 2 days or Alessandro would face federal charges for harboring a fugitive and obstructing a custody proceeding. A fugitive? Elena had never been anyone. She had been a waitress, a nanny, a woman who counted pennies and rationed milk and slept in a converted closet for 3 years. She had been invisible. And now, suddenly, she was a crime. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of wet concrete and dying leaves, and Elena closed her eyes. She thought about the past 3 years in sharp, terrible detail. Noah learning to walk, his small hand gripping her index finger for balance. Noah's first day at school, wearing a shirt she had washed a dozen times to keep it white. Noah running to her after nightmares, his voice small and certain, "You're my real mama." She had never told him that wasn't true. She had let him believe it because it was the only thing either of them had. Tomorrow morning, Catherine would come with lawyers and police officers. She would walk into this house in her white Chanel suit and white leather shoes that had never known an honest day's labor. She would take Noah by the hand. And Elena would watch him leave, understanding with a clarity that felt like a blade through her heart that this was what she deserved. She was nobody. She had nothing. She had no right to keep him. Through the glass door behind her, a sound broke the silence. A small cry. Not quite awake, not quite asleep. The particular sound of a 6-year-old boy reaching for comfort in the darkness. Elena turned, moved back inside, and found Noah sitting up in the guest bed, his sheets tangled around his legs, his face wet with tears he didn't remember crying. He was still half asleep, caught between nightmare and morning, and when he saw her, his lip trembled. "Mama." His voice was so small it could have fit inside a thimble. "You're still here." She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled him into her arms. He wrapped around her like a vine, like something designed to hold on, his fingers gripping her shoulders with the strength of pure terror. "Don't leave me," he whispered against her neck. "Please don't leave me, Mama. Everyone else leaves. I do not want you to leave." Elena held him and felt something inside her break open, not with pain but with a kind of terrible clarity. She was about to make a choice. In the next 48 hours, she would have to decide whether to be the person Catherine said she was, a criminal, a nothing, someone who should disappear, or to be the person this child believed she was. The person who stayed. "I will never leave you," she promised, pressing her lips to the top of his head. "No matter what happens. No matter what anyone says. I will never leave you." Noah fell asleep in her arms, his breathing evening out, his small body finally at rest. Elena held him until her own breathing steadied, until the shaking in her hand stopped. She carried him back to his bed, tucked him in, and made sure the nightlight was on, the one shaped like a star, casting gentle blue light across his sleeping face. In the hallway, she found Alessandro watching her through the open doorway. She hadn't heard him approach, hadn't heard his footsteps on the marble floor, but there he was, still wearing the charcoal suit from the courthouse, his tie loosened, his jaw dark with the shadow of evening. His eyes, storm gray, burning, held an expression she had never seen before. In that moment, watching her stand there in a borrowed nightgown with her hair falling down her back and her eyes still swollen and her whole body trembling with the weight of impossible choices, Alessandro Calabrese fell completely, irrevocably in love with Elena Cole. Not because she was beautiful. Not because she was tragic or broken or any of the things that made men feel like saviors. He fell in love because she had stood on a balcony at 2 in the morning thinking about disappearing, and the only thing that had stopped her was a child calling for her in the dark. He said nothing. He simply stepped forward, and when he reached her, he pulled her against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other flat against her spine. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and solid as an oath, and she allowed herself, for just a moment, to believe that maybe she wasn't as much of a nobody as she thought. At 8:48 a.m., 3 white police cruisers pulled through the gates of the Brookline estate. Their sirens were off, but their presence was a scream. Catherine Mercer descended from the lead vehicle like a general surveying a battlefield. She wore white Chanel, white leather shoes that had never walked a day's shift in their lives, and an expression of practiced maternal concern that would have been beautiful if it hadn't been a lie. Behind her came two lawyers in grey suits, and behind them, Harold Brennan, his face bruised where Elena had struck him in the hallway of the apartment, looking almost victorious. The marble foyer of Alessandro's home suddenly felt very small. 8 police officers stood near the door, their presence filling the space like water filling a cup. Catherine's heels clicked against the stone floor, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceiling, and when she smiled at Alessandro, her teeth were very white. "I'm here to collect my son," she said, her voice the voice of a woman who had already won. "The court has ruled. I have the emergency custody order right here. You have 24 hours to produce Noah, or you're looking at federal charges. Harboring a fugitive. Obstruction. I could press additional charges about Elena, but I'm being generous." She looked around the foyer with theatrical disdain. "I'm sure a man of your standing would prefer to keep this quiet." Alessandro stood near the grand staircase, and his men, Tony, Enzo, and 12 others in black suits, formed a loose semicircle behind him. They said nothing. They simply stood, like monuments, like a statement in itself. "Where is my son?" Catherine's voice took on an edge. "Bring him down. Now." "Your son," Alessandro said, and his voice was like distant thunder, "is asleep upstairs in a room painted the color of the sky. He has been asleep for 4 hours because last night he had a nightmare, and the woman who has raised him since he was 3 years old held him until the terror stopped." He paused. His men exchanged looks. They had never heard him speak like this. "You were paid to protect him. Instead, you let your landlord beat the woman who actually loved him." Catherine's face hardened. "Don't be dramatic. Elena Cole is a criminal, a drug addict, completely unstable. I have documentation." She produced papers from her purse, waving them like weapons. "Psychiatric evaluations. Arrest records. She's dangerous." Elena appeared at the top of the stairs. She wore simple black pants and a blue sweater, and her eye was still swollen, still purple, still telling the truth that Catherine's papers were trying to erase. When she saw the police officers, when she saw Catherine standing in the foyer like she owned it, Elena's whole body went very still. Harold stepped forward, pointing at her. "She attacked me," he said, pulling up his shirt to show bruises that matched his fists, not her hands. "Look at these. She's violent. Unfit. The boy needs to come home where he's safe." Alessandro turned to Elena. "Don't speak to them. Don't defend yourself. Because you're under my protection now, and they're about to learn what that means." He turned back to Catherine, and his expression had changed into something cold and precise, like a blade wrapped in ice. "You want to play with lawyers and courts? Fine. But you made a mistake. You threatened my family. And I don't forgive that." He pulled out his phone and made one call, speaking one sentence, "It's time." What happened next would not make the news. Not officially. The police officers would file reports stating that the custody order was withdrawn, that Catherine Mercer had voluntarily surrendered all claims to Noah Calabrese, and that all charges against Elena Cole were being dropped due to insufficient evidence. The reports would not explain why Catherine looked like she had seen a ghost, or why Harold Brennan's hand shook as he signed documents transferring guardianship to Alessandro. At 3:36 in the morning, in a warehouse in Revere near the harbor, 12 men in black moved like ghosts through the darkness. They moved with purpose, with efficiency, with the kind of silent coordination that only came from years of moving together. No sirens. No warnings. Just the whisper of expensive shoes on concrete and the soft click of doors being opened. Catherine Mercer was zip-tied to a steel chair in the center of the warehouse. The light above her was harsh and white, and it made her skin look like wax. She screamed at first, her voice bouncing off bare walls, but screaming only made her throat hurt, so eventually she stopped. Vincent Genovese, underboss of Boston's second most powerful family, stood in front of her with his hands in his pockets. He was 63 years old, with silver hair slicked back and a scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw. He looked at Catherine the way a man looks at a problem that has already been solved. You stole from Alessandro Calabrese, he said, his voice almost gentle. $2.3 million. You used his godson as insurance to prevent retaliation. That was unwise. Catherine's mouth opened. Closed. Her voice came out as a whimper. I have money. I'll pay back double, triple, whatever you want. We don't want your money, Vincent interrupted. We want you gone. Completely gone. You have two options, Mrs. Mercer. The first is that you disappear permanently. New identity, new country, never come back to Boston, never speak to anyone about what you did, never try to contact your son. You leave tonight with nothing but your purse, and you never, ever return. The second option is that we make you disappear ourselves. And believe me, there are ways to do that don't leave anything behind for anyone to find. Catherine's breathing became shallow. The light overhead hummed its electric hum, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the circle of light, footsteps moved back and forth with purposeful rhythm. Which will it be? Vincent asked. Catherine broke. Her whole body went slack, and she wept like a child, gasping between words. I'll go. I'll leave tonight. I'll go right now. Please, please, just let me go. Vincent nodded to one of his men, who cut the zip ties. Catherine collapsed onto the concrete floor, her white Chanel suit torn at the knee, her perfect hair falling into her face. She crawled toward the door, and nobody stopped her. By 4:15 a.m., she was at Logan Airport, buying a one-way ticket to Buenos Aires with her personal credit card. By 5 a.m., she was on a plane, watching Boston disappear beneath the clouds, understanding that she would never see her son again, never see anything familiar again. Harold Brennan didn't get the mercy of escape. He was dragged into a different part of the same warehouse, stripped of his clothes, and presented with a choice that wasn't actually a choice at all. Work for the Genovese family, running their properties, collecting their debts, managing their people, or disappear into the harbor wearing chains. Harold, who had spent 16 years extorting women and trafficking misery, chose servitude. He understood then, with a terrible and absolute clarity, that he would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. One mistake would mean death. One word out of place would mean drowning. He had become a slave in everything but name, and the warehouse would be one of his last memories of freedom. Back at the estate in Brookline, Noah was still asleep. Elena sat in the kitchen, drinking tea that Alessandro had made for her, her hands wrapped around the warm cup, when he came in carrying his phone. It's done, he said simply. Elena looked at him. She understood what that meant. She understood it in the same way she understood that there was a price for being protected by Alessandro Calabrese, and that price was being bound to him in ways that went beyond law or choice. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me, he said, sitting across from her. I didn't do this for you. I did this because in 15 years of building an empire, I forgot what it meant to have someone to protect. You reminded me. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise over Boston, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and everything that had been dark and impossible seemed, for just a moment, like it might actually be survivable. 2 weeks later, the morning light poured through windows Elena had never owned before, windows that belonged to her now, windows that overlooked gardens where the leaves were turning gold and red and copper. She woke at 5:30, the time burned into her bones by 3 years of servitude, and for a moment she lay still in sheets that cost more than she used to make in a month, waiting for the fear. The fear never came. The kitchen was already warm when she came downstairs. Alessandro stood at the stove in sweatpants and a grey t-shirt, his dark hair still damp from the shower, his expensive watches left behind on the marble counter. He was cooking eggs. Elena stopped in the doorway. You cook? He didn't look up from the pan, a small smile at the corner of his mouth. I'm Calabrese. Of course I cook. Sit down. She's Saturday. He placed a plate in front of her, scrambled eggs impossibly fluffy, toast with real butter, fresh berries arranged like a painting. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that doesn't need filling, until the sound of small feet came down the hallway. Noah appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hair standing straight up, his eyes half closed, and without hesitation he climbed into Elena's lap and pressed his face against her chest. Alessandro watched them. Something shifted behind his dangerous eyes, something soft and dangerous all at once. "What happens now?" Elena asked quietly, one hand stroking Noah's hair. "With Catherine gone, with Harold, where do I go?" "You're not going anywhere." Alessandro's voice was steady, like an oath. "This is your home now. You and Noah." Elena shook her head. The old panic rose like a tide. "I can't just stay. I need to work. I need to pay you back for the medical bills, the $47,000, I know it's a debt, I can get a job, I'll." Alessandro reached across the table. His hand covered hers, his fingers calloused and warm. "You already paid me back. You loved my son when no one else would. You ran into a storm with $34 in your pocket rather than leave him behind. That's worth more than money could ever measure." She wanted to argue. The habit of gratitude, of owing, of being small, was carved too deep. But his thumb traced slow circles on her palm and something inside her broke open like a locked box finally releasing what it had been holding. 3 days later, Alessandro taught Noah to ride a bicycle in the driveway while Elena watched from the porch. The boy was laughing, breathless and fearless, his small hands gripping the handlebars while Alessandro jogged alongside him, his large frame bent forward with concentration. "That's it, just like that," he said, his voice patient in a way that made her chest ache. "I've got you. I won't let you fall." When Noah finally pedaled on his own for 10 whole seconds, the boy's joy was so pure that Elena felt tears sliding down her face. She wasn't crying from sadness anymore. She was crying because joy was still strange to her, still terrifying, still something that felt like it might vanish if she looked at it too directly. That evening, they went to Alessandro's restaurant. The place was upscale in the way that meant quiet elegance, deep leather booths, candles that flickered like captured stars. The staff knew Alessandro, they materialized the moment he entered, pulling out chairs, bringing water without being asked, treating Elena as if she were made of something precious. A plate arrived that she hadn't ordered. Then another. Fresh pasta with sauce that had been simmered for hours, seafood that tasted like the ocean, bread so warm it steamed when it was broken open. The restaurant manager, an older man with silver at his temples, bent low to Elena's ear. "For the boss, we cook special," he said. "You are family now." Family. The word didn't fit her properly yet. She was still trying it on like a dress borrowed from someone taller. Under the table, Alessandro's hand found hers. His thumb traced circles on her palm, over and over, a rhythm like a heartbeat, like a promise. She felt him watching her, felt the weight of his attention like a blanket settling around her shoulders. When she turned to look at him, there was something in his face that made her breath catch, not hunger, but something deeper. Recognition. Like he was looking at someone he'd been searching for without knowing what he was searching for. One night, after Noah had been tucked upstairs into his own bedroom, Elena found herself in the library. The room smelled like leather and old paper and something that reminded her of Alessandro's cologne. She was holding a book she wasn't reading when the tears started. They came quietly at first, then harder, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs that had nowhere else to go. They were not tears of pain. They were the tears of someone drowning in disbelief. The door opened. Alessandro stood in the frame, still dressed from dinner, his tie loosened, his jacket discarded. "What's wrong?" His voice carried across the room like a blade. Elena tried to speak, couldn't, tried again. "Nothing's wrong. That's the problem. I keep waiting for this to fall apart. For you to wake up one morning and realize I'm just me. The nanny. The woman with $34 and a handwritten list of debts that keeps growing longer." He crossed the room without a word. Before she understood what was happening, he knelt in front of her chair and took both her hands between his own. "Listen to me," he said. His voice was quiet but absolute, like the sound of a vault closing. "You are not just anything. You are the woman my son loves as his mother. You are the woman who showed me that my father's death doesn't have to define me forever. You are the reason I remember what it means to live instead of just survive. Do you understand?" She shook her head because she didn't, not completely, not in a way that went deeper than her fear. He kissed her then. It was gentle and careful, like she was something made of glass, like one careless movement might shatter her into nothing. She kissed him back, tasting salt from her own tears, tasting something like hope, tasting the future she had never believed she could have. In the hallway outside, Tony and Enzo stood speaking in low voices, the way men speak when they've witnessed something that changes their understanding of the world. "He's different now," Tony said. "Lighter. You see it?" Like something heavy came off his shoulders. "She did that," Enzo replied. "The nanny? Who would have thought it could happen?" Tony nodded slowly. "Not a nanny anymore. She's the boss's woman now. She's family." 3 weeks later, Alessandro's lawyers delivered papers to the house. He sat with Elena and Noah at the kitchen table, the documents spread before them like an offering, and he explained in careful words that a 6-year-old could understand. "The paperwork says that I'm legally Noah's father now," Alessandro said, his eyes moving between the boy and Elena. "And Elena, if you want it, if you're ready, these papers say you can be legally his mother. Officially. Completely. Not just in our hearts, but in the eyes of the law." Noah looked up from his juice box, his small face solemn. "So then you're really my mama? Not just the mama who takes care of me, but my real mama." Elena's hand shook as she reached for the pen. The signature on the adoption papers was the first time she'd written her name as Elena Cole, mother. Not nanny, not caretaker, not the woman paid to be temporary. Mother. She had become someone's everything. That night, she pulled Noah close and whispered into his hair, "I always was, sweet boy. Always." Outside, the December wind carried the smell of snow coming, the cold bite of change. Christmas was approaching, and for the first time in her life, Elena was going to spend the holidays in a home that was actually hers. 6 months later, on a morning when the estate was buried in snow that fell like a benediction, Elena stood in the foyer of Alessandro's home and looked at the Christmas tree. 20 feet of evergreen crowned with a star that caught the light like a captured sun, and beneath it, presents wrapped in paper that cost more than she used to make in a week. Noah tore through them with the pure joy of a child who had never learned to doubt that good things come, who had never been told he was a burden. Alessandro sat beside Elena on the sofa, his arm heavy around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong, a rhythm that had learned to include her. She thought about the woman she had been 6 months ago, the one with $34 and a handwritten list of debts that never stopped growing, the one who had thought love meant disappearing. She had been wrong about so many things. "What are you thinking?" Alessandro asked, his voice low against her hair. "That I spent 3 years invisible," Elena said. "I thought that was just how life worked. That some people got to shine and the rest of us stayed in the shadows. But you don't believe that anymore. It wasn't a question." She turned to look at him, and she saw in his face the man who had been broken by his father's death, who had built an empire on vengeance instead of hope, who had forgotten how to live. She saw the man she had healed, and whom she had let heal her in return. "No," she said. "I don't. Real love doesn't make you smaller. It makes you whole." Tony and Enzo stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the three of them together, and they exchanged a look that spoke of loyalty and family and the understanding that some people walk through fire and come out not burned, but transformed. That evening, the restaurant. The candlelit booth in the back. Noah chattering about his new bicycle, about school, about the dog he desperately wanted. Elena and Alessandro shared a look over the boy's head, a look that needed no translation. "We survived. We're home." Alessandro raised his wine glass. His men, seated nearby but giving them distance, fell silent. "To family," he said. "To second chances. To the woman who taught me that darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only love can do that." Elena raised her glass, tears catching the candlelight. "Only love," she whispered. And in that moment, surrounded by people who had learned to treat her as precious, Elena Cole was invisible no longer. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, like and share this video with the people you love. Every comment you leave is a precious source of motivation. We wish all of you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace.